Canada. And we will have the I guess gratitude really to have two excellent speakers here for you today to present on risk tolerance and human performance. So we have Norm Ritchie and Rick Therio. Norm is someone who's been in the industry quite a length of time, as well as Rick, and we'll go through their bios in a second. So just to go through some slide information here concerning this webinar, there is a chat button you can use here to basically interface with the speakers and other participants as we go along. If any of you are having any difficulty, certainly send myself or Andy on here as well. Just put something in the chat, and we'll get on to assist you as best we can. There is the ability to raise your hand in the if you're logging on with a mobile device, and other functionality that we'll just talk about here as well. You've also got these polling features here where you can do yes, no, give some feedback. You can click on the participants pane as well and see some of the menu options there. If you're wondering where that is, right? So that's basically going to be at the top of your screen, and you'll see the participants symbol just like you see here today. Can you see this presentation and hear clearly? If you can, please click yes, and we'll just verify to see if anyone clicks no. I don't see anything coming up here, so I think we're good. Check functionality here. So just progressing along here, we have Norm Ritchie. So Norm Ritchie has 34 years of experience in the oil and gas industry. He's a mechanical engineer from Glasgow, Scotland. He's got a nice accent, which I certainly enjoy. He's the co-founder of 5PSI in 2013. It's a consulting company that both himself and Rick work with at this time. Rick has 38 years of experience in the oil and gas industry, primarily in the drilling and completions industry, and is a registered safety professional. And both Norm and Rick have done stuff in the Canadian oil and gas industry, and have done other presentations and stuff. Certainly Rick, many of you are familiar with him from his time in this industry, and working with a variety of initiatives, both at Energy Safety Canada as well as with DAC on IRPs. And so we're very thankful to have them here today to give this talk, and look forward to any comments. Folks, if you have questions along the way, you can certainly put them in the chat function, and we can definitely help out there. And otherwise, we may defer to some of the questions at the end. We are recording this session, so it can be posted as an on-demand. So just to be aware of that. And yeah, we'll get going here. Norman and Rick, if you want to share your screens.
Well, thank you, Robert, for inviting us to have this conversation with you today. And I want to thank you to everyone who agreed to attend. And really, it's a great privilege to be able to speak with you. I also want to thank Robert and Andrew for setting this up. I think that it's a valuable discussion. And in times of COVID like this, it's great to be able to get together with a group of your peers and have a pretty strong discussion. And one of the things that we all believe in and all focus in on, I believe, is that we manage risk. So whether you're a president, a vice president, a manager, or a safety specialist, each of us is managing risk. So the industry and the business in general has come a long ways over our time. And what our current performance is, we can see that, at least in my timeline of about 40 years of being in the industry, I've seen massive change, and I've actually helped to facilitate some of that change. And I want to agree that, we can make this whole area a lot safer than it is right now. But some of us are often wondering, are we getting to the point where we're as low as reasonably practicable? And sometimes you might think that it is as low as reasonably practicable, but other times you're going, well, how come these incidents are occurring? And although these risks have certainly decreased over time, we're also wondering, is there some other ways and some other practices that will help drive us below that curve? And we think at VPSI that we certainly can add some tools and some discussions to help you get there. So it is an expectation of us that we come to work every day and we're able to go home safe and sound at the end of that day. But it never used to be that way. A couple of the events that I saw when I first came into this industry were such that we expected to have injuries on a very regular basis. And even to the point when I was a 15-year-old roughneck, I've got to see a person have an amputation of their foot. That had a huge lasting impact on me as a person, and as it was starting to drive my career, I started to think about how could I make a change in this industry and how could I see some of those results happen. And we have seen those results, and we continue to see some positive results. I was talking with a good friend the other day, and hopefully he's on this discussion and presentation. But it's one of those things where he was starting to see some great results. And one of the things that he had within his corporation is he was talking about lagging indicators. And as an industry, we spend a lot of time talking about the lagging indicators. And in his situation, he talked about having unbelievable results of only a few years ago of having a total recordable incident frequency at 0.14 and a motor vehicle incident rate of 0.46 per million kilometers. So for a large company or a large corporation, those are outstanding results. And it certainly demonstrates that the company has some very strong leaders, commitment, processes, and engineering controls in place. So all of those things are true and are valid. But then we also have to ask this question, do we know the whole story? And we know that on those days when we scratch our heads and say, they did what? Or how is that possible? That we still have some work to do. So as we travel on this journey of mitigating business risk and subsequently the injury risks, we have not been able to engineer out people. And people are where we're going to spend our time talking today. So people bring a big context to the whole work environment. We are certainly people certainly make decisions based on your leadership, but they're also based in the past leadership that they have experienced. So this could have been their parents, could have been their teachers, former supervisors, but most certainly will not be from what you have instructed them to do. So their personalities form a significant part of their communication style, how they like to give and receive information, and how they mold their behaviors. The training that they receive from you and how this is mentored and developed through this experience in order to form their competencies are all implemented within the stream of continuous change and what you expect as continuous improvement and learning. So last week, Robert gave a seminar on Fit for Duty and the work that the committee has completed over the last 5 years, and also began to address the need to support and align our resources to ensure that the workers are ready to solve the challenges that we're asking them to perform. So we all look at this and go, how effective are we at utilizing those resources? And one of the pieces we want to talk about today is resource efficiency. At this time when everything is so tight within the oil and gas industry, we believe and perceive that there are some massive resource constraints, and also that we can do something about that by utilizing our resources much more effectively. And so we're going to go into the first poll question, Robert. And the question is, okay, in your experience, do you believe that all unplanned events can be prevented? And those answers are yes, yes, but not all worth the investment, no, but our culture is not ready to accept it, or just straight out no. So we'll give you a few seconds just to respond to those polls, and we'll see what kind of results we're going to get.
Lots of good numbers coming in here. This will be interesting.
Yeah, this is well distributed. It's interesting.
Give you a couple of seconds more, folks, to get your responses in. I think we'll probably end there.
That's quite an even distribution. So when you look at that, when you look and you think about that, we've got we've almost 60% believe that yes. The next piece to that is it worth the investment? And that's where we're going to get a little more into the breadth of this discussion, and Norman's going to lead us through some of the challenges with workers and moving through that. So Norman, over to you.
Thank you, sir. I'm Norman Ritchie. It's great to be here. Somebody dumped me out of my presentation there, which is not very nice. This may take a moment, ladies and gentlemen. All right. So, Robert, can we get that poll out of the way there?
I don't think they can actually see it.
Oh, okay. I'm going to close it.
But I will close it down.
Thank you. So, the challenge when we start to worry about people is that, well, the first thing is that humans are extremely complicated beasts. I'm sure each one of us can think about the folks that we live with, the folks that we work with, and just agree with that intuitively. If you know some uncomplicated people, then that's very, very unusual. In the workplace, people are completely unavoidable. No matter how much automation we build, no matter how much we try to eliminate them, we can reduce, for example, rig crews through the use of iron roughnecks and all kinds of fancy toys. There are still humans in the chain there. There are still humans involved in designing these things, if nothing else. And second point, certain types of human failure, which I'll talk about here in just a moment, are not preventable. They're not preventable just by virtue of us being human. And given that, it's somewhat unavoidable that we are going to see some unplanned events. Even when we try to design our workplaces and our tools and equipment and so on to fail safely or fail softly, there are still going to be unplanned events. In addition to that, okay, we definitely have a technical problem here. In addition to that, influencing human behavior is not always straightforward. We'll talk more about that as we get into the presentation. And in every organization in the energy business, there is limited manpower, and particularly in the supervisory spots, everybody now has wider and wider spans of control, and as a result has much less interaction time with each individual under their supervision, and as a result, much reduced ability to influence. In addition, even given the tendency for companies to clean out anybody over 50 these days, there are still a whole bunch of very deeply rooted traditional behaviors in organizations, and some of them are very much embedded. And you look around, I spent some time up in the oil sands last year, and there are still dinosaurs roaming the oil sands. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. Anyway, I think their numbers are reducing, but they're by no means extinct yet. Another thing that's very difficult for organizations to accept in some cases is that you have to have an understanding of the nuances of human behaviors in order to come up with ways to handle them, manage them, correct them, or prevent them. And those are going to be very different according to the various different flavors of human performance problem that you're trying to address or that are present in your organization. So there are many different nomenclatures around human performance. Lots of people have invented their own vocabularies to describe this stuff. We have decided that other people have done all the hard work, so we picked up a set of words that is now fairly widely used. These are developed by, amongst others, the Energy Institute. And those of you who work for large energy companies probably help pay for all this stuff, so thank you for that. So we identify 4 main flavors of human failure: slips, lapses, mistakes, and violations. And the slips and lapses are the tricky ones in a sense because you cannot prevent those just by virtue of being human. And I'll explain a little bit, hopefully by use of an example. So we're going to use a problem here as an example. I'm not sure, some of you may be familiar with the song, "One Bourbon, One Scotch, One Beer." This is a slightly different version and does not involve any singing. This is called "One Problem, One Scot, One Beer." And the situation is this. This is my refrigerator. You can tell I live by myself because it's largely empty, but there's only one beer in there. And that's a problem. That's one problem, one Scot, one beer. It's a nice beer. I recommend that stuff. However, I'm going to get in my car and go to the store. So off I go, drive through my neighborhood. It's a beautiful day in Houston. Fight my way through the traffic on the freeways, and I get to the store. And I have to remember, too, that I also need eggs. I need eggs and a number of other things. But here I am at the beer. I reach for the beer. Oh no, there's a crack in the box. So I need to be extra careful, concentrate on the eggs, get them home in one piece, put everything carefully in the car, head back to the house, look at that marvelous architecture, back in the neighborhood, into my garage, note the Scottish flag, get to the kitchen, eggs have made it, fantastic, and I've got the ice cream home without melting it, which is great, but what's this? I have brought home light beer. There is no place in my house for light beer. I don't drink light beer. I don't know anybody that drinks light beer. You saw me reaching for the real beer. It was in the picture. You saw it. I reached for the real beer. I ended up with a light beer. Now, this may not have happened to you, particularly not with respect to beer, but it may have happened to you with respect to milk. You reached for the proper milk and you end up coming home with a 1%. Or you reach for the full-fat yogurt and you end up coming home with a light, fat-free stuff. You know what I'm talking about. And that is us being human. We can't stop this kind of human performance problem. We have moments of inattention. We have moments of forgetfulness. They happen something like, for each of us, if we're doing something that we're familiar with, we're not under pressure, we're not fatigued, we're in generally good spirits between 5 and 10 times per hour. Between 5 and 10 times per hour, if we're in peak order. Now, some of you work in large organizations. I want you to do some math here, or arithmetic, as we call it where I come from. I want you to think about that. Let's be optimistic and say that everyone in the organization is in peak physical and mental condition, so they're only going to make 5 slips and lapses per hour. So multiply that by the typical day. So you've got 5 times 8, which is 40. So that's each person per day, 40 slips and lapses. Now, let's say you've got 1,000 people in your organization. It's starting to get a bit tricky here. The math is starting to get a bit tricky, but you've got 1,000 times 40, and that sounds like 40,000 slips and lapses in your organization per day. Bearing in mind, that's if everyone's in peak mental and physical condition. Now multiply that by a year. And I'm not even going to try to do that, but pretty soon you're talking about real numbers here. And the challenge there is that if you've got tens of millions of slips and lapses going on in your organization every year, some of those are going to arise to the point where they result in an unplanned event, and some of those are going to have consequences. And that's just a reality. So to those who said, yes, all incidents are preventable, I challenge you with that. Unless you've developed a way to make your organization completely human-proof, you're going to have some unplanned events. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get deeper into this. So that is slips and lapses. And I'll describe those again here in just a moment. Mistakes and violations are also fairly tricky. We have to be really sure to understand the context, because each of these things is driven differently. Even when you get to violations, there are all kinds of subtleties to those, and there are at least 6 different flavors of violations. So pretty soon you can start to see a fairly complex setup beginning to develop. So another poll here.
Yeah, so with this poll, Norman, we're going to look at people's current investigation techniques. And do you believe that your investigation methods have reduced the risk of a reoccurrence of the event? Yes, yes, and can measure the progress, no, or unsure. So we're getting some good results in here. It's kind of all over the map. I find it kind of interesting that the front runners on this poll are the no and yes, you can and measure the progress. So we're kind of right in the middle of this. What do you think, Robert? Another 15 seconds?
You've got 80% of people, so I think your numbers aren't going to change too much at this point.
So we've got some organizations that can, in fact, complete the investigation and measure the progress of the investigation. But there's half of the group that also says, no, we can't go ahead and measure it. So there's some opportunity for discussion here, Norman.
Excellent. Thank you. Very good. So let's say we do have something bad happen and we identify that there's some kind of a human performance challenge component to that. I like to think of it in a fairly broad, very high level way initially and ask myself, did the person intend to do something and end up doing something different? Think of that in the sense of me going to buy beer. I intended to buy proper beer. I didn't deliberately buy light beer, but I did. So that would fall into that category. The other category is that the person acted deliberately, but we would rather they had done something else. I've lost control here for some reason. There we go. Are you doing this, Rick, or am I?
I'm doing that.
Okay, so there's the high level choice. the person either did something other than they intended to do, or they acted intentionally, but we would much rather they had done something else. And that's a fairly easy thing to identify. Now, if we decide that, say, they didn't act in a deliberate way, then we call that inadvertent, and we call that an action error. If they, on the other hand, acted deliberately, then there are actually a couple of possibilities there even. Either they believed their act to be correct, but they were wrong, or they acted deliberately knowing what they did was not correct. So on the left-hand side there, we have the slips and lapses, as described earlier, where a moment of inattention, a misstep has resulted in your unplanned event, or a moment of forgetfulness or an omission may have been causal in that respect too. So that's our slips and lapses. On the right-hand side, we have the person believed their act to be correct, but they were wrong, and we think of this as, we call it a mistake. It's an unfortunate terminology in a sense, but like I said earlier, we didn't invent it. We think of many of these things as being mistakes, but in this nomenclature, mistake has a very specific meaning. It's an information-based error. Either the person was, for example, they had the wrong procedure, the procedure was incorrect, the procedure was too detailed, it wasn't detailed enough, they didn't have the right training, they didn't have the right competencies, they tried to apply something they knew from a different situation to a situation where it was not actually applicable, and so on and so forth. And then on the right-hand side, we have everybody's favorite, the violation. Now, I'm not going to go into this terribly deeply, but just please be aware that there are a whole bunch of sub-flavors to violation. We've got at least half a dozen of them listed here, and I'm sure many of you have heard these terms, some of which overlap. So the big question here, the big thing we all need to be really careful about is, do we have sufficient evidentiary basis to differentiate between all these things? Because I can assure you, most organizations don't give their people enough grounding in this stuff to actually develop a good data set to move through analysis and eventually come up with preventive and corrective actions that are relevant to the underlying problem. In order to have a relevant corrective or preventive action, you have to know what the problem is. And so I urge you to think real hard about whether you have in your organization this level of ability to differentiate between these various factors. So let's go back to the question that we started addressing with the poll. We want to be pragmatic here. We want to be realistic. And so there are a few questions that we can ask to reach that. The first one is, should all unplanned events be fully investigated? Secondly, which are worth investing in to prevent reoccurrence and which are not? This is important because if an organization is going to learn, the only place an organization, the only vehicle an organization has by which it can learn is its management systems and business processes. Everything else depends on individuals. The flip side of that is that that's also where bureaucracy lives. And some of you, I'm sure, have worked for companies that are highly bureaucratic. And that's no fun, and it's really hard to get anything done. So if we're all worried about efficiency and getting stuff done in a way that isn't overusing resources, we need to think about this. There's a fine line that divides value-adding learning and increased bureaucracy. And if we're going to not cross that line, we have to be really careful not to over-respond to stuff going wrong. So not all events are learning opportunities that are worth taking. The big question, though, how do you decide? How do you decide which are and which are not? This is actually a corrective action. When I wave my finger like this, it's a corrective action because we knew that the technology would let us down, and so we developed hand signals for this.
Excellent. So Norman, we're going to have another poll here that's basically looking at how do you decide when your organization needs to conduct an investigation. And what I'd like you to do is select more than one response here, but more than likely you'll have one that sticks out. So is it based on incident severity, the risk matrix, unintended consequence, or whether a customer, a VP, or a manager says something to you? So we'll open the polls up and you can make a decision on where you think it's best fit for your organization.
We have a slip or a lapse in play here because, oh, here we go. Now we've got the right one.
Yes, we do actually, because I've got that entered in as poll number 5 when it's actually poll 3.
So I think that's a mistake because you thought you were doing the right thing, but you were wrong.
Right. Very true.
Well, we're getting some interesting results here. We're seeing risk matrix and incident severity come up pretty highly on this, over 80%. So the unintended consequences or whether or not somebody's yelling at you are much lower on this scale. So I think we can call it there, and we can see that incident severity is showing up at more than 50% of the events, Norman. So we can start to talk about how that result plays out for us.
Certainly, yes. Let me just close this.
Just
yeah, we have to.
It.
Yeah, here's the thing. There's a big battle has to go on here between logic and reality, because there are some things that we would propose are totally logical, absolutely logical, and yet are absolutely impossible in real life. And there are a number of things that drive that slightly illogical behavior. The first one is the existing practice that we have in many organizations, which forces us in a particular way. So, for example, many organizations, if there's a reportable or recordable injury, are forced to do some kind of root cause analysis. And that is totally illogical and absolutely ridiculous. And yet there we are, we're forced to do it. Second challenge we have is individual traits. We don't like to see people get hurt. And so we're going to tend to over-respond to injury events. That gets even worse when we think about group dynamics, because humans, we're herd animals ultimately, and we don't like to see members of the herd get injured, and we as groups tend to ooh and ah when that happens, and logic goes out the window. And then lastly, we have expectations placed upon us both internally and externally. So for example, your CEO is going to get really exercised if somebody gets hurt, and you're going to be required to do things that may or may not be logical just in order to satisfy that. Or it may be that your local community places expectations on you, maybe your employees, maybe you've been on the news, and that in itself can drive your behaviors post-event. So we have to realize that although we'd love to be purely logical, we are forced to be pragmatic. And Rick's going to talk us through an example of how that might apply.
So I want you guys to put yourself on a well site visit. You're out to go and check a well site out or a pumping station. And imagine you're going out into this facility and you're standing there when suddenly an object falls from up high and hits the deck beside you, then bounces away. What do you call that? Well, you probably call that a near miss. Will it be investigated? Well, you'll probably say yes. Do you think that the people who operate the facility day to day are technically competent to work out what fell, why, and how to prevent it from happening again? And you're also likely to say yes. And what is the minimum number of actions that are needed in order to prevent that from happening again? And the reality is you need one good action in order to prevent that from happening. More than likely, you've created a list of actions that need to take place. Now, in a parallel universe, everything is the same except when the object falls, you happen to be standing 6 inches to the right and it strikes you on the shoulder and injures you severely, and you have to be taken to the hospital for treatment. So what do you call this? It's probably an incident or an accident or a medical treatment case. And will it be investigated? I would say for sure the answer would be yes. Do you think the people who operate the facility day to day are technically competent to work out what fell, why, and how to prevent it from happening again? And most of the time you're going to say yes. And will they be allowed to? Now that is where you get into a sticking point. Now, because of the injury and the consequences that have changed, sometimes the organization takes that out of the people's hands who know that best. So what are the minimum number of actions that are required to prevent that from happening again? It's still one good one because the problem is still the same. So we're going to take you through another scenario. So in a parallel universe, everything is the same except when the object falls, you happen to be standing 6 more inches to the right and it strikes you on the head and kills you. So what do you call that? Well, it's probably a fatality. And will it be investigated? Audience will say, yeah, for sure it's going to be investigated. And do you think the people who operate the facility day to day are technically competent to work out what fell, why, and how to prevent it from happening again? And most of the time you're going to say no. And why is that? Because they won't be allowed to. And they will, not be able to even be involved with finding out what happened until much later in the event. So again, what is the minimum number of actions that are required to prevent it from happening? It's still one good result or one good response because the problem is still the same. So we still have to look at our existing procedures and practices. We have to control ourselves because we typically are more engaged as soon as the severity goes up. We have to manage our groupthink, and we also have to manage the expectations of both our client and our regulatory partners because none of the events have really changed. It's just the consequences that have occurred. Okay, Norman, back over to you.
So one of the key things that we like to do is actually split the consequences away from what went wrong, and that's as much to do with the focus as anything else. The logic is that once an unplanned event has occurred, you've somewhat lost control of the consequences. We're going to talk about risk matrices a little bit today, and one of the odd things about risk matrices is that they actually squish 4 layers of probability onto a 2-dimensional surface. And the first, one of the layers of probability is the bad thing happening. And then once the bad thing has happened, you unleash an extremely broad set of probabilities related to the consequences. The problem itself can give rise to everything from a near miss to a complete disaster. And so for us, the target is always the unplanned event. So once we've set aside the consequences and we focus in on the unplanned event, there are a couple of questions that we like to ask to determine the value of the learning opportunity that this unplanned event has just presented us with. And the first of those questions is, does it matter? Is it significant? And even if we answer no to that, where's my presentation driver? There he is. And decide not to proceed any further with analysis, we're not going to discard these things. We want to record these things and look for trends. There's there's every possibility that although we're only spilling a gallon here and a gallon there, when we add up all the 1 gallon spills we're having, we may have a really, really big spill problem on our hands. But let's ask this significant question in a risk-based way. Everyone's seen a risk matrix, I'm sure. It's a very sort of representative risk matrix. We've got probability along one axis and then outcomes along the other axis. And a couple of things that people don't tend to get about the risk matrix is that the line between the green and the yellow, and I know some companies have moved away from green to light blue and various other color combinations, but it's all green to me. And the interesting thing about that is that that green involves a set, or actually represents a set of incidents that the company is okay with. And it's always interesting to have people take a look at their risk matrices and ask themselves, what's the most severe outcome that's still in the green? What's the most severe outcome that's still in the green? And that's going to be in this picture, in that box that's furthest to the left and 3 up. Now, there are lots of organizations where that's a serious injury. There are some organizations where it's a fatality. There's one tremendous organization, some representatives may be in this webinar, where killing an employee is in the green and killing a non-employee is in the yellow. And that's a great way to show your employees how much you value them. But the line between the green and the yellow represents your organization's risk tolerance, or put another way, risk appetite. So here's a little thought experiment to do when an unplanned event has occurred. If there's any doubt about where it sits in the risk matrix, ask yourself this. If we do nothing in response to this unplanned event that just occurred, if we do nothing and we're about to do this same task 6 months from now and we do a risk assessment, where will it be in the risk matrix? And if it's still in the green, even having done nothing about the event that you just suffered, then that means the logical response to the event you just suffered is to do nothing, because it is within the risk tolerance that your organization has expressed through its risk matrix. Now, that's a fairly controversial message, I'm sure, but I ride my mountain bike a lot, and I fall off my mountain bike occasionally. Now, I know when I get on my mountain bike that although I've assessed the risk, the residual risk after all precautions as being still acceptable, i.e. in the green, I know that I could still be involved in an unplanned event that could result in serious consequences. And I have been. Has that prevented me getting on my bicycle again? No, it has not, because it's a risk that I accept. And we in our organizations accept risks all the time, all the time. Residual risk is present in almost everything we do. So, key point here, just because something is unlikely doesn't mean it won't happen. It just means you're allowed to be surprised if it does. So, this is the significance test. It's a risk-based test. It's not just about consequences. It's about the likelihood of the unplanned event happening again and the likelihood that the same set of consequences would arise. If it's deemed green, you don't need to mess with it. If it's deemed yellow or in the red, then sure enough, it needs to be dealt with. So that's how we handle significance. Rick.
Yeah, I wanted to bring out a couple of other points here, is that when we look at our risk matrix, we typically take this whole risk matrix to our workers, we get them to do a risk assessment, and then we do a pre-job assessment to verify that the risks and the controls are in place. But what we're typically asking our workers and our supervisors to do is manage the boundaries between the green and the yellow or the gold on a daily basis. So they typically know where the boundaries are of the yellow or the gold to the red, but are often challenged with the boundaries between the green and the gold. And so as an organization, we need to manage our expectations with what we know within that risk matrix. So how you can assist them in knowing where they're at is by actually spending some time while they're conducting those activities. And so how do you create that culture of continuous improvement and growth within that organization? By investigating those events and helping them understand what it is that you expect and what the organization expects to manage that. So we're actually going to have another poll here and ask you the question of what are the stages in your current process of investigating events? And you can have multiple responses to this. So if all of those are in there, then go ahead and pick all of those. So is it immediate response and communication, gather information? Do you have a data quality check, a root cause analysis, an issue of you're issuing the report, and also have you validated the actions? So let's see what we've come up with on this one. So we're getting one interesting number that's sticking out for us. And that is around the data quality check. Because what you're actually seeing in here is many of these activities should be part of your investigation process, including the data quality check. And so we're really going to spend a little bit of time talking about that as we move through these next couple of slides. Okay, I'll just shut this one down, Norman.
All right, so don't try and read this. Do not try to read this slide. This is an example only of some company who may have representatives in this meeting who have built a little flow chart to decide whether something matters or not. And then the next question that we ask, Rick, if you can advance us here. Is it preventable? So I'm going to go through this right quick. I can tell you 6 types of unpreventable, unplanned event. Acts of nature, acts of third parties. Those are parties over whom you have absolutely no control. We've talked about human error. There are some events that are so complicated that we really can't see them coming. And if we can't see them coming, they're generally unpreventable. What we call semi-predictable failures. These are when you buy an engineered component, such as a hydraulic hose. You buy an expectation of life, an expectation of performance, but you by no means are ever necessarily going to get that. It's going to fail. You just don't know when. You don't know the circumstances under which it'll fail. And then what we call undetected latent errors. And those are problems that don't become apparent, either design or manufacture problems. They don't become apparent until they cause an unplanned event. And now I'm often told, well, everything's preventable, but these things, the only way you can prevent these is if you're Doctor Who and you can drive your TARDIS back in time and accurately reach a spot where you can change the future. Now, it's important that we understand that there are actually very few of these unpreventables relative to the total population of unplanned events, but we waste an enormous amount of time, energy, and resources on them. A much larger, more significant chunk of events are those we choose not to prevent. And this is another slightly controversial point, but it's again related to risk. If you think about that population of events, unplanned events that are in the bottom left-hand corner of your risk matrix, Rick, those are actually events that you have chosen not to prevent. You've accepted these, you've managed the risk to a point where you're okay with it, and you've accepted that some unplanned events are going to occur. So you cannot have risk assessment and believe that all incidents are preventable. You just can't. Those two things cannot coexist. Again, another example of another party's flowchart to determine preventability. So it's not always possible to do causal analysis. And note, I don't call it root cause analysis, because another thing I love to annoy people with, there's no such thing as a root cause. Anything you call a root cause is always, always, always the effect of something else ad infinitum. So please try and not use the term root cause analysis. Let's talk about causal analysis or cause and effect analysis. And let's stop talking about root causes, because while most, I'm sure, of the members of this webinar are sophisticated enough to know that when they say root cause, they don't really mean root cause. The people that are in the top of the organization are not that sophisticated, and the people that are at the lower echelons of the organization are not that sophisticated either. So it's kind of a cognitive bias that we have. It's called the curse of knowledge, that we assume everybody else understands that when we use the term root cause, we don't actually mean literally the root cause. We mean something else. Anyway, rant over. One of the challenges that we want to go back and think about is this idea that garbage in means garbage out, and that we need to have a very simple tool, which is what this ladder is that Rick's going to roll through here very, very swiftly. Every piece of information that goes into our analysis needs to have one of these words placed up against it. And I want you to look at this ladder and think about, okay, we're going to spend the company's money based on an analysis, and the analysis is going to be based on information or data or evidence. Which of these types of data are we okay with? And I'm going to go with the top two. And if you stray further down the ladder, you need to be thinking really carefully about whether that's a valid foundation for the next phase of your investigation, which is the analysis. It's a really tough thing to admit that you don't have enough data to do an analysis, but sometimes it's the logical thing. All right, now we can talk about analysis itself very, very briefly here. We overuse sophisticated cause and effect analysis tools. We are very, very enamored of these things, but they are often way over the top for what we need in order to prevent the bad thing from happening again. And so we should acknowledge that there's a spectrum of tools available to us that allocate a sufficient amount of resource spend to the complexity of the unplanned event. And this is, again, in no way related to the consequence. The consequence has now been set aside. We used it slightly to determine the significance and whether the problem's worth analyzing. But once we've done that, the consequences are no longer important. So let's think about using a very, very simple tool. And if it works, we win. If it doesn't work, then we move up this spectrum to the more sophisticated tools until we find one that does work. And sure enough, about 20% of the time, you'll need all that fancy RCA training you've had. But 80% of the time, you won't. Okay, Rick, let's move. So we're going to show you here quickly. If we agree that the objective of all of this expenditure of time, energy, and resources is to prevent the bad thing from happening again, or at least reduce its probability to a point where the associated risk is back in your green area there, then we have to come up with something that's relevant and effective against that. And that's all we have to do. And here's a spectacularly simple way of doing it that relates to human performance. Here are 4 focus words to think about if we're working on a human performance problem. If it's a slip, we want to find a way to focus people, or if it's a lapse, we need to find an effective way to remind them. If it's a mistake, then the solution is going to be some form of inform, and violation, very tricky. We could do a 3-day workshop on that if you want, but the idea there is to motivate. Thank you for the TARDIS joke, by the way. Here's a method that we absolutely love because it's so simple nobody believes it. The idea is that once you've identified your unplanned event, there's always an act of people that caused or allowed it to happen. In fact, usually there are several. And once you've identified that, you can very simply identify the opposite of it. And if you can then find a way to reliably obtain that future behavior that you've identified that you want, then essentially you're done. So this is a very straightforward method. We're going to do another webinar in a couple of weeks, I think, about investigation analysis, and we'll go into this in a whole lot more detail then. But rest assured that this is an analytical method that, given good quality data and a clear understanding of your unplanned event, this is called the 2-box, and it is as simple as it looks. And the only way we can be sure that the thing works is by validating the output against the unplanned event. Rick?
All right. So I think there's a couple of points that, in the advent of time, Norman, that I think is necessary, and that is really to talk around corrective action and how do you validate your corrective actions. So one of the poll results that you had is that we showed several companies needing a validation of their corrective actions. And Norman has come up with a very simple process to validate that these corrective actions can in fact be successful and will make the change that's necessary to prevent that incident from occurring again in the future. And so that's the next piece that we'll talk about in the next webinar, which is on the 24th of June with Robert. So we do look forward to having that review with you. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going to skip through a few things here. So there's lots of great points that Norman would be making right about now.
Yeah, unfortunately, it usually takes me about 20 minutes to say hello, so trying to do a webinar in an hour is almost impossible for me.
And there's also some great learning about corrective action types. So what we've really learned is that learning something once is reasonable. Learning something multiple times is unreasonable and is a resource waste for your whole organization. So if you can take and learn to fix or correct an event once, would you go ahead and make that change? And the answer would be probably yes. But if you have to learn that same result 3, 4, 5 times, then you know that you're not really in the same ballpark. So we've got a way of classifying those corrective actions as type 1 corrective actions, type 2, and type 3, where type 1 looks at how do you apply your solution to the current work project and only that current work project. If you go ahead and have to apply to that current work project and several other pieces of equipment, well, that's a type 2, so it's a slightly better corrective action. And a type 3 corrective action is when you can take and make a company-wide change that will be learned and growing across your organization. And that becomes type 3. And we'll teach you a little more about that during this next section or session on the 24th. So let's just take a minute to talk about what actions can you do right now if you're sitting on the other side of this Zoom webinar and thinking about, okay, what did I learn today and how can I do something about it? Well, first off, you can do a gap or an opportunity analysis on your current processes from a human performance perspective. You can go ahead and implement your significance and preventability filters. You can facilitate a HAZOP like human performance risk review. You can go ahead and develop and train on-site data evidence gathering protocols to allow the incorporation of human performance You can also train your people in resource efficiency and effective analysis of human performance issues. And by that training for your personnel, that may even be your manager, your vice president, or your company CEO on how to utilize that and setting their expectations. And Norman, any other closing comments that you'd like to comment on here?
No, I'm itching to get some questions.
Yeah, absolutely, folks. If anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat there, and we'll facilitate that discussion. I'm just going to share my screen now.
Very good, Robert.
Let's see here.
Well, I've got a question for everybody. Do you think I should shave off my COVID beard? Let's vote on that.
So let's go back to the question that Doug has asked, and it's, can we get a copy of the PDF of the slides so that we can see the information that's been skipped? And the answer is yes, we will share a PDF of those slides. And we'd also ask that you will go ahead and join the next session so that you can learn a little more about this.
Feedback there saying keep the beard.
Keep the beard, yeah, yeah. Okay, fair dues.
Any other questions? Give folks just a couple more minutes if there's anything that's, I know there was a couple comments earlier on here. Let me just see. There was the reference to TARDIS, and then there was a reference at the beginning just around preventability, and we're talking about incidents around incident severity of potential incidents.
There's a real question. There's a real question. This is one for Rick.
I feel that after 29 years, everything is meaningless. Constant unease is in my new frame of mind. Prediction seems impossible. Dramatic, I know. Help. So that's a very good question and a very good, I guess it's a tough mindset to be in. If you get to the point where you're thinking that there is no way of solving the problems, it comes down to how do you control the risks that you're seeing, and do you have processes that are in control, and do you have adequate resources to put those processes and other controls in place? And I've felt like that a couple of times in my career and wondered, is there a way out? And it comes down to careful planning and utilization of adequate resources to help me with that. And we'd love to assist you with that. If you want to get a hold of us, we can help you build a little bit of action plan. As I know, Energy Safety Canada is also in that mode of assisting companies, because that's the resource base that is there that all of us play with. So please do reach out, and we'll get into your specific situation, and we can help you out any way that we can.
I think it's important too to acknowledge that one of the reasons that we're all a little bit frustrated currently is because we've been so successful in getting from how things used to be to how they are now. That we're now, I started working drilling in 1985, and there was the number of fingers on the drilling rig was not divisible by 10. Everybody had some kind of scars or bits missing, and you don't see that now. You just don't see that. And the graph that Rick showed at the beginning is a real representation of progress. And the challenge now is that we find ourselves worrying about the most trivial and ridiculous events because that's all we've got. When a large organization with thousands of employees has 2 or 3 recordable injuries in a year, that's a spectacular achievement. It's absolutely astonishing. and yet it's there. We still have this desire to improve, and that can be very frustrating. And I just want to say that too, that it's actually impossible for the human brain to exist in a state of constant unease. The brain can't do it. And so if you find yourself heading that way, I suggest you do yoga or go ride your bike or something, and try and get out of it, because it's really, really not natural and not good for you. As someone pointed out, they got rid of the spinning chain. That was not the only reason why people are losing fingers. I can assure you of that.
I want to just take a minute and touch on one of the comments that this one specifically that Tony made, Tony Gannon, and we just scrolled past that a little bit. So I've been in the industry for 35 years and feel that we have come a long way. Most of the older drilling consultants have come and gone, and the up and coming are seeing that safety is important. However, on that note, money matters, and no matter what you say, when the oil companies say jump, you say how high. And that's a result of many years and many practices. Tony and I agree with you that typically when the producer comes along and says, you're going to do it for this amount, you're going to do it this way, it takes a lot of backbone and a lot of courage in order to say, no, we're going to stick with our processes, our systems, and the training that our people have had in order to protect and prevent them. In reality, it's pretty easy to offload that risk to someone else. And as soon as you take that risk on, you're now saying that I can do it for this amount of money or that type of a process. And you've now degraded your standards and your credibility with your people. I think from a leadership perspective, we need to take that time to support the people to manage the work the way that it was intended to be done. And we just can't afford to take on the risk and accept the risk without having people getting hurt. So I don't think that's an acceptable result.
So there's one I want to go back to that we kind of missed because it was a little earlier. Tanner asked, should standards like CSA Z260 or API 754 drive analysis? And my response to that is that this is one of these situations where logic maybe has to give way to reality, that there are going to be some situations where that's an existing practice that's going to drive a behavior that may not be logical. But those things tend to be based on consequences. And so you have much more freedom of action when the consequences don't garner a whole lot of attention. So it's actually, this is another reason why near misses are so valuable, is that you don't have nearly as much light shining on you, and you can just be more sensible when you're approaching a near miss than you can when you're dealing with an actual loss event. And then there was another one down here, hang on. Here we go, educating management so they understand risk. Unfortunately, the human being is not very good at dealing with risk, and management are particularly not good at dealing with risk because they are quite happy to accept risk right up until the negative is actualized, and then the shit hits the fan. So yeah, there's a whole lot of misunderstanding about risk tolerance and risk acceptance, not just in management, but also in regulatory bodies, it has to be said.
Cool. Well, thanks, guys. I think that's probably good for questions. I know there's a few other people that have some questions. We can probably respond to you after. I really want to thank both of you guys, Norman and Rick, for taking the time to do this. We have some upcoming webinars that are coming up. Certainly, obviously, Norman and Rick will be back with us on the 24th. There's one more on the mental health side of things on June the 18th. On the 10th, we have one which is tomorrow that Andy will be doing on confined space video series that we're launching. And then on the 25th, rounding up the end of the month, we have one there. Are we on the line in the line of fire that I'm doing with Jose from Suncor? And everyone on the call should basically have received an email just a few minutes ago, basically asking for feedback. So please give us your feedback to the SurveyMonkey link. You will receive it in an email. If you didn't and you just basically got onto the presentation, this is the link here. And please let us know how we're doing.